All right, pursuant to Governor Baker's March 12th, 2020 order suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, general law, chapter 38, section 18, and the governor's March 15th, 2020 order imposing strict limitation on the number of people that may gather in one place. This meeting of the Hubbardston Capital Planning Improvement Committee will be conducted via remote participation to the greatest extent possible. Specific information and the general guidelines for remote participation by members of the public and/or parties with the right and/or requirement to attend the meeting can be found on the town website. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort will be made to ensure the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via Zoom. In the event we are unable to do so, despite best efforts, we will post on the town's website a comprehensive record of proceedings as soon as possible after the meeting.
All right. So agenda tonight would be going over what what people have hopefully everybody had time to speak to the departments or look through the departments' requests. And I guess the first thing we do is just discuss what you found, any interesting things you want to bring forward to the group, concerns, questions, so forth and so on. And I guess after following that, we can continue the discussion of town building and how we want to move forward with that. And then, we'll leave it whatever else Ryan has that he wants us to go over tonight. Sound okay?
Yep.
All right. So I don't know. We'll start down the. Who wants to start with any capital needs and department needs that they want to bring forward?
Francois, I briefly had just an email that I sent, but did not receive a response back. That was very specifically to the to Saba, and I have not received a response back. I must submit. I mean, it was a bit late on my end, so I'm keeping the channel open. I do know that Ryan, you had received some information in terms of some capital expenditures that they wanted to include as part of this year's budget. But other than that, I really don't have any additional information other than what you presented, I think it was a couple of weeks ago.
Okay, fair enough.
I did meet with Travis last week, talked about the need for a small excavator as well as additional funding for the roads. He did convince me that the excavator would certainly be an advantage to his department. He's looking to purchase a used one to save money, not to buy a new one. He already has a trailer which came with the hot box, which can be used to haul the asphalt hot box, which we purchased this year. To haul the excavator around, he feels it would be a savings in labor, as well as less strain on the town backhoe. That he showed an example of working on, I think it was New Westminster Road, where they had to use the backhoe to clear beaver deterrent. And using the backhoe blocked the traffic both directions. With the small excavator, they would not have had to block traffic from either direction. It would have been able to do the work. And said he was pretty convincing as far as the labor savings, the time savings. I mean, $45,000 is not a lot of money for the type of use he would expect to get out of it. And as far as the extra 100,000, he's doing what he can to keep the roads up, maintain the roads using information that he's learned visiting, going to different seminars and talking to other people in his position as to what works best as far as resurfacing the roads. I did tell him that, this year, $100,000 may be difficult to come up with, but certainly everyone who drives on our roads know the conditions. Certainly, I think, in my opinion, they have improved, but it's a never-ending battle.
Okay, yeah, certainly over the last 10 years, the condition of Hubbardston roads have improved dramatically from where they were.
Yeah, I will say it's not really related, but I really think this town is fortunate to have someone like Travis running our highway department. He obviously enjoys what he's doing.
No, he's a good guy for sure. Stephanie, anything you want to report?
Sure thing. So I talked with Dennis, the police chief, today in regards to PD needs. So they don't really have a lot on the docket. They have those 3 cruisers that apparently are in the budget for like the next 5 years. So that's like kind of like typical for their department. They have 4 cars and they rotate them out essentially. So, you know, every couple of years they do need like a new one because of all the wear and tear on the cars. But he said that he could like definitely look at maybe, you know, trading in one of the cars to the DPW or giving one of the cars to the DPW to eliminate one of their needs. Although I didn't see anything that was relevant to that on like the bigger budget. Or he was saying like he could discuss with Ryan over like trading in the car and maybe having some like cost savings there. But those are 2 options that he gave. But he definitely like they need to like replace those cars. And then in regards to the vehicle cameras, I believe is 15 grand placeholder that's on the budget for that. So they actually got a grant for that they can use towards the cameras. So he said that out of like I believe it's 15K, he would probably only need like up to 5,000 of that, and that would be just for like installation. So therefore, you know, we could gain back 10 grand from there. Every bit counts, right?
That's right.
Yep.
He said, you know, it could be as low as 2K, but he would feel more comfortable just kind of placeholding the 5K for now, until he kind of gets quotes, because he hasn't gotten quotes for the installation yet. So it might be even more than 10. And then he said like one of the things that he has to consider is like the $500 approximately a year for storage. And that would be for the footage from the cameras. He said he could probably work that into like one of his accounts, but again, he would have to like sidebar with Ryan and figure out his budget versus this one. So found some money for us.
Okay. And I think Bill, I had no departments because they were all taken up. But I think Bill had the fire department. He's obviously can't make it tonight, so I guess he can report next time in there. So okay, at least everybody got to meet their departments and kind of see their needs a little bit, which is good. Ryan, do you want to go over any more of the capital items tonight, or do you want to move into building discussion? What do you think is the best way?
Sorry, the plan is for this committee to at least approve or recommend for FY 2022, which is hard to say. I can't believe we're talking about 22. And then hopefully solidify the entire 5-year plan so we can have a focus moving forward. So I think we should take a look at just the overall picture again and just have some short discussions based off the lessons learned on where you're at in terms of priority. And I can obviously make some recommendations there with the thought that maybe we can squeeze a meeting in before Christmas or the holiday to finalize things. So I don't know if you're willing to do that.
Sure.
So I will call up. Everyone can see the spreadsheet.
Yes.
All right, so the gray year, we've gone over this already, but just to go over it again. So 21 is the year we're in. And that grant that Chief was talking about. So we've already funded the vehicle camera and storage server. So the grant's going to wipe that out for this year in the current budget, and then give us some extra money for next year. So it's a nice thing, but unfortunately it doesn't make your decisions any easier this year because that money's already been committed. So looking at FY22, here are the department requests, and many of these were discussed already. So the excavator, the additional road repair, and Chuck, I don't know if you said anything about the exhaust mitigation system. Did Travis talk about that at all? You're muted, bud.
No, that did not come up in our discussion. I had forgotten about seeing that.
And I think that's more involved project, so it's definitely a candidate to push. Not that-
Ryan, about the exhaust mitigation system, we were going to do that in the fire department, but that fell apart because of a bad contractor and stuff. So what's the status of that? Is that ever going to come back around, or
It's funny, we just signed the contract today, so
you did? Okay.
I'll have a timeline on that within a week. Actually, we hired an engineer to do to work with the what I think is very difficult contractors. So they're going to handle that for us as sort of a middleman, and we think we have a good procurement, and that system should be done by the spring.
Okay. Okay.
They're not easy though, and they require engineering, and I learned a lot from this last one. So it's going to be my recommendation that although a mitigation system is warranted, that it be put into later years in the plan. So then you have this very cemetery. We're just trying to get them included in the cycle. So it's a small dollar, but it's sort of a token nod at their involvement in the capital planning and how much they do with so little. Fire, these are some big items. Turnout gear is their fire equipment that they wear that needs to be changed over quite a bit, not only because of concerns about carcinogens, but they also wear out quick. And I know there isn't a ton of structure fires, but they do a lot of work and training in that gear, and it does wear out, and it's not uncommon to have to replace it every couple of years. The utility truck is a brush truck, so ours is very old, and they're asking to replace it, and it's in yellow because they increased their requests based off current costs. So this went up about 20 grand. They added, anything in red has been added to the plan. They do need new radios. And it's been a while since we updated our public safety radios. So the police also were going to ask for these, but they got them in the grant that Stephanie was talking about.
Ryan, can I interrupt 1 second there? With Rutland Regional putting up the tower for the communication system, with the portable radios, any way to get that included in a grant or any funding from that?
That would be the goal. And there are grants from fire, but the idea is we would need to outlay the money, and hopefully, like you saw with the police department, we'd get it next year. So it doesn't help us in capital planning, but it is likely that we would get something.
Okay.
Yeah, I already talked about the additional road money. The police cruiser that Stephanie articulated well, these are cyclical. We're trying to do every other year with our police cruisers, and it seems to be working out. If you don't do that, then you have really high operating budget costs with repairs. These are taxed vehicles that are used and idled and moving all the time. So it's not like a regular vehicle. They wear out quick. And it's not like having good equipment for the DPW is really important, but you can absorb lengthier times with the DPW because in many cases, it's not public safety that's and employee lives that are in danger, depending on the piece of equipment. So although you need to continually replace your DPW equipment, police cruisers have to work all the time. So it's not a typical replacement cycle. It has to be functional in order to make sure everyone's safe. And then good news for the document, this is for me, the document management system. We got a $60,000 grant from the state to take care of this. So we get to do something fun here and hit delete. And that comes off. I don't know why it's not summing. Okay, so in summary.
It didn't change the dollar amount.
Yeah, it did not. I don't know why. It's sad when it doesn't change it. It must not have included that in the. Okay, so in summary, for resources available, just straight resources, there's $300,000 in, I'll do the math down here so it's easy to see. There's $312,000 in free cash. We need to reserve, or I like to reserve, this isn't necessary, but this is my recommendation, that you take 200,000 of that off the top for the operating budget. So that's to carry the current use of free cash in the operating budget and to make sure we have enough for next year. So we have available in what we normally used for capital, which is free cash, 112,000. So also have available to you 56,000 or so in capital stabilization, which is a rainy day fund for capital. And then of course you could eat into this 200, right? I wouldn't go any more than say 150, but you could stretch this a little bit if you wanted to make that recommendation. And you could use all of the savings if you wanted to do that too. So I would say the maximum amount of resources you have is 212,000, and that would be putting a lot of strain on our reserves. A lot of strain, but it is available and it's part of your decision-making process. So if you have, let's just make it easy math. Say 125,000-ish on the conservative end and 200,000 on the stretching the budget end. And you have $294,000 in requests. So you have to pare down this list. At least that's what the Board of Selectmen is asking you to do, to make a recommendation on what should be a priority in fiscal 22. That's
Can
why
go
we
back-
pay you
can we
big
see
money.
these here? I mean, so clearly we shouldn't be shooting for the 200 because we don't know what's coming down the pike with monies and COVID and all this other business we got going on.
Correct.
So
So a good town administrator would tell you you have 112,000 to work with, but a realistic town administrator would say you're not going to say no to everything. So somewhere between 112 and 150 is where we'll probably land based off of priorities that you set. So I can tell you, first thing you should do is cut the additional road money because that's a want, not a need.
Yep.
And that gets you to 194. So something big has to go.
well, I mean, exhaust mitigation in the DPW probably isn't necessary this year, like you said.
Yep.
You know, they've been humming along fine without that for a long time.
I'm not saying it ends here, but we'll just put it here for now. It's like playing Sims for real, right? 168.5.
And the fire department needs the full 17,000 for the turnout gear.
That I don't know.
And with the utility pickup truck, they need to spend the 46, that I did see the upgrade from, there was, I don't know, some report I think you had shared earlier, but it's
If you fund
46,000.
if you fund the utility truck, then that's what it's going to cost.
Yep.
I mean, I think obviously, I mean, a steel trimmer for $500 is short money, like you said, and we can, you know, keep cemetery happy and moving along with their work. But, you know, radios and turnout gear is life safety equipment. Pickup truck isn't necessarily life safety, you know, at this point. So, I mean, we have to get rid of other things. To me, the pickup truck would probably be the most, you know, ideal thing to go at this point.
Or at least to move it to another year.
Exactly. Yes.
Because the only other thing you have is you have the excavator, the pickup truck for big money items. And to answer your question fully, Chuck, I would say if you told people that they were going to lose an item or it had to go next year, then maybe pencils can be sharpened, but there's only so much room here. You're definitely not going to make up tens of thousands, maybe thousands.
Yep.
Ryan, in your discussions with Travis and company, you know, I know they've been looking for a rubber wheeled excavator for years. Do you think that's something that they need? Like in your discussion with the department heads, it's obviously between an excavator and a pickup truck. You know, what do you think we need to fund sooner than later?
I don't want to sound wishy-washy, but it really is it's a toss-up. So the brush truck will last for a long time. When it's needed, you need it. There's only so much equipment that can go into the woods and recover folks and put out fires. And we do have a lot of open space in Hubbardston, so it's a necessary piece of equipment. Whether it would last another year or two, I would want you to ask the chief directly, because I just don't have the fire experience. And you know, Bill could do some commenting. In terms of the excavator, They have been asking it for a long time. It would make them much more efficient. It does create additional safety in the DPW. Okay, but like the brush truck, they haven't had it so far and they do a great job. So you never want to hear that with capital, and that's not what I'm recommending. But I would have the two department heads come in and talk to if you're really deciding between those two, so you can prioritize it.
Quick question, the brush truck that they are asking for, have they been able to quantify the times where they actually needed it and did not have it?
They have one now. It's just, it
It's an
needs to be
older one.
repaired, like a
Okay,
lot
so-
of our.
The question then I would bring back here is what's the operational cost on a year if this were to be extended by another year?
Okay. So a few ways to do this, and I'm just trying to organize this. So you could send out requests for information and
Yep.
have both department heads put together a report for you, or you could hold another meeting and have them come and attend, or both.
Mhm.
And you might hear something from fire chief saying, maybe we do the turnout gear next year because utility truck's so important, right? There's those types of decisions that can be made that only he would know, being the department head.
I think that's a wise thing to do.
Yeah. Yeah, so would everyone be okay with having them come sit on
Yep.
another meeting in a week or two?
Yep,
Yes.
I mean, because we're close, so it's just really, we're kind of one item away from meeting the goal, so I don't think it's going to be a huge deal, but it'd be nice to hear, like Ryan said, from them what they see in their priorities.
Yeah, so you're down to, you'd be able to hit that low end mark, that 125 pretty easily if one of these went. And then you might get more information from them on priorities for the coming years, because what extending the plan out 5 years does is it sets expectations for both the town, the residents and taxpayers, and the department. So although we've really focused on this year, placing these into the next years really matters for you and for future versions of you as well. Because what I hated when I inherited the job was the idea that we'd have to sell the plan every year, and people would, they wouldn't fight with the plan, but they would try to remember when this was placed, et cetera. So extending it out 5 years allows people to see what's coming. And kind of the real problem that we're facing in this year, we're at $1.1 million on the books. Now, I'll get to this a little bit later. A big part of that is the new fire truck, which can be placed into the long-term planning and borrowing and maybe debt exclusions. So that cuts that in half, but that's still, if we're hoping to get $300,000 to $500,000 in free cash a year, $200,000 to $300,000 off. So
Right.
you can't
But-
put like 250 in one year and 1.1 million in another. It has to be adjusted a little bit.
But we do have those marijuana facilities coming on board soon, so that'll inject a little bit of leeway, I hope, into the budget. So there is a little bit of optimism as time goes on.
I think so. It's not all doom and gloom. It's just
Yeah.
planning, because I'd like to see, and Michael, you know this from hiring me, the idea of, okay, we get an influx of X marijuana dollars. We should know where that's going before it comes in. That way
Right.
there's no temptation to not swing it. So if we do commit to, say, $1 million in marijuana revenue, basically it's already spent, and then we can focus on other problems.
Right.
Otherwise, you're sitting on $1 million and everybody has ideas for it. And that's good and bad, because it's hard to get things done.
It's hard for that kind of revenue to say that's going to be in our general budget forever, because who knows how long marijuana is going to last, right? I mean, it could be 5 years, it could be forever. It might all fall apart in 2 years. Everyone's probably seen on the news this Amazon style home delivery marijuana service now they're allowing here, which is going to really strain a lot of these little local shops that towns have come to rely on now for money. So Yeah, you're right. Just put it towards capital or gonna, some other need like that over the next 5 years. All right, so we're close. So we'll have Travis and Bob talk to us next time and see if we can come up with an idea of which one we think is more important this cycle or not.
Okay. I will facilitate that for you whenever we decide the next meeting is.
Okay. All right, good. So we're close to that. So probably next meeting, I think we can take a full vote on capital plan and get that out to the select board then by the end of the year. And now buildings and stuff. Anyone have any more thoughts or ruminations about what we discussed last week?
Just to start it, do you mind me sharing the document I sent out just to?
No, go ahead.
I actually showed it to the Board of Selectmen last night as well. I think it's helpful. Helps me. So I emailed it to you, but it's probably gibberish until I explain it to you. So not gibberish, but it's hard to see in my head. Okay, so one of the goals of the Board of Selectmen for me this year was to start chunking off pieces of these long-term problems that we keep discussing so we can create a plan that's connected to the master plan. So there's plans on plans on plans. And all of it is important. So the things that are important to the town as I see it, and as we've sort of solidified in the Board of Selectmen, are the ability to maintain town reserves, addressing the operational budget deficit, which exists. It's shrinking because we've done a good job controlling growth, but it's still there. There's a need for a public safety building, as you discussed last time, or some public safety solution. There's a need for a town hall or some type of renovation of the Slade building or some combination there. And then there's this 5 to 10 year capital problems that the 5-year plan addresses some of it. But the main things being townsfolk want more and better roads. So that has a cost. And then there's a fire truck and an ambulance in our future that are major expenses beyond what we can normally do, which is pay as you go free cash. So here's $300,000 for an ambulance. It's difficult for us to do that. So if you combine, so what this document is showing you is if you were to, or what I would be recommending for funding sources short of something like marijuana or additional revenues that we're not expecting, which you would hope would be a part of this solution. Another thing that's coming down that you've heard me say, and the Board of Selectmen hears me say all the time, is in 2023, the 10-year road project comes off the books, which frees up approximately $180,000 in the operational budget, which could either be used to offset this operational budget deficit for a few years, or could be used to borrow for things like a fire truck or an ambulance or a DPW truck. So you could take what you're currently spending on borrowing and continue to borrow to fund some of the long-term capital, or you could take that borrowing and debt out of the budget and use it to address some of the budget growth problems. The problem with taking it out of the budget is you'll never put it back. So once you eat up that operational budget, it's never coming back. So we try to keep 2 to 3% of the operational budget committed to debt like you do in a household in order to extend your purchasing powers and make sure that you have what you need. So continuing on, if you were to say increase the operational budget by $100,000, that would take a $100,000 override vote. And that equates to this number to the average household in terms of a tax increase. So this average household in Hubbardston is $278,000 this year. So if you were to increase the operational budget by $100,000 in an override, it would cost the average home $55 a year. So I took that number and extrapolated out to all these problems. So reserves could be funded with free cash with a good plan, basically an initial investment of $100,000. And then if you put $25,000 of your free cash every year into your reserves, you would maintain more than the reserves that are necessary to maintain our bond rating, which is an important way to do that. Bond rating matters because a lot of this borrowing we're talking about to keep costs low. Then the budget deficit, this is the hardest sell. Hubbardston has never passed an operational override for their budget ever. One of the few towns in Massachusetts to never override Prop 2.5 for operational purposes, which is a choice, and it's fine, but it does cause all the budget constraint that we have annually. Plus you add in expense growth and service demand, and that's why you have the budget problem you do. So then you have public safety building and renovations. So I took a shot at what things would cost, listening to Bill Murray and others. Somewhere between 4 to 8 million for public safety, somewhere between 1 and 3 million for the Slade building. So if you were to borrow on the high end 8 million, you would need $320,000 a year to pay that off, assuming a 40-year low interest loan of about 2.5%, which is available and I think we would qualify for. That would equate to $181 on the average tax bill. And then it goes from 4 million to 8 million. So this one is relatively easy to understand because you can get that 40-year low interest loan and really limit the tax impact for a big building like that. Then the Slade renovation would have to follow, as you mentioned last time. At some point you have to address, this includes the senior center, the senior space, and moving everybody out of the library. So on the high end, you're looking at 3 million for that, or 200,000 annually. And this is obviously a mistake. So this would be approximately 111,000. I mean, 111 per year.
That's
Yep.
if it can be renovated.
Yes, yep. Big assumptions being made here. When I say renovate, you're gonna have to tear it down and put up a new building, essentially. You might be able to keep something like the Slade plaque and then call it the Slade building. Okay, so then roads, this always comes up. If you were to say do a debt exclusion override every year for 100,000 to add to the road maintenance budget, these would be the costs. And then those two bigger projects that are eating up the capital plan, which I told you I would reference in this side of the house, the fire truck and the ambulance, there'll have to be some type of borrowing or debt exclusion there to pay for that. So these are these costs here. So you could see if you use the 180,000 in borrowing, you could say borrow for 7 years on the fire truck, 7 years on the ambulance, and maybe even address some of the Slade building reno and keep it within the operational budget. And then you're looking at debt exclusions for sometime the budget and then the public safety building. Or you could use that debt to fund the budget deficit, and then you would have to go piece by piece debt exclusion votes on your ambulance, fire truck, public safety building, and Slade reno. So this is like a fun a la carte tool for you to use in order to help shape some of these decisions. And this is why stuff never gets done, because these are not easy decisions. Every one of these has a dollar amount, and it's so overwhelming that there's some stagnation to it. So I think you're on the right track in saying it needs to start somewhere. But if you can place all these decisions with that type of matrix into context, I think the majority of people would understand where you need to go, and it might work. So that's a lot of assumptions, as Charles just said, but just something to help shape your conversation.
Yeah, well, certainly the less things we can have to override, the better, right? I mean, that's obvious. You know, the big ticket items like the fire truck and ambulance, you know, I would say from all the years on the select board would be better to use the debt service that's coming off the roads project to pay for those, keep as much as we can in the operating budget. And I agree with Ryan, you know, when the bond payments come due or finished, to put that back in the general fund, you know, that's $200,000 or so that we would never see again for capital. So I think using that for debt is great, and that would free up money on the capital plan. So, you know, putting the bigger ticket items like the fire truck and ambulance, knowing that we're going to use that kind of debt service for that, sort of takes away the pressure from this board and future select boards from having to make a case to override that, especially if we want to move forward with the public safety building, which is going to be a big enough hurdle to climb as it is now to get that approved. So no, it's certainly the least amount of stuff that gets override or debt excluded, the better. I mean, that would be my overarching suggestion would be, yep, take the money from the bonds and put it towards the bigger ticket trucks and things we need in the future. Because both of those could wait till that's done, which is what, 2023, I think that's finished. That was a 10-year note.
2 more years.
2 more years, yeah. So by the time that's done, that's about the time we have to start thinking about the fire truck and an ambulance. So I think it's a good idea to just to kind of pencil those in for that.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Just the second order effect of that, though, that needs to be articulated to the public is if you take that plan, then the budget pressure is going to continue to grow. So you're not addressing the budget deficit. So at some point that's going to give. And that's, there will be a fair amount of people that say, well, if you can free up from debt in order to pay for rising costs, then we don't have this budget pressure anymore. It's not the way I would do it, but it will cause a continued headbutting of sorts in the departments for any resources that are there, because we're only increasing by $150,000 a year. The schools ask for 140 of it, so you're not talking about a lot of room over the long term. And I agree with everything you said, Michael, but it's just articulating that concept that at some point there's going to have to be a solution to the budget.
Right. Which there's no easy answer, right? Because if we free up the debt service and put it towards the budget, well, then we're going to be stuck with capital as time goes on, which, certainly 10 years ago, our town was in a much worse position in capital than we are now. We had things that weren't working and trucks that were terrible and fire trucks that were broken. And, this town never invested in capital, never invested in roads for many, many years, exactly for that reason, was because every penny went to the budget. So, yeah, I don't know.
Well, and again, too, not our area, but I mean, the school budget is something that we've talked about needing to be addressed too.
Yes. Yeah, no, I mean, when, that takes up what, 60-70% of our budget in town,
Right.
and continues to grow. So, a 4, 5, 7% growth on that every year is a tremendous amount of money that we have to put into it every year. So, yeah, that's a conversation that happens every year. And, it's not necessarily Quabbin's fault. We all like to blame Quabbin, but it's not really Quabbin's fault. They're trying to do the best they can with limited resources. It's failure on the state level to fund regional schools the way they should be.
Right.
Especially schools west of 495. That's really where, they're taking a big hit. So how do you guys want to proceed then? Do you want to just, we're going to assume that any buildings were going to have to be debt excluded. There's no way we can put that in any kind of budget. So, I think the public understands that, that's not going to be a surprise for them. The bigger surprise is going to be, oh, we need another fire truck or we need another ambulance. They're going to say, we just bought one. So that's going to be a harder sell as time goes on, if that has to be debt excluded over time. So, and that might be another discussion that we have to have with Bob when he comes in. We just did get another fire truck 2 years ago. How many do we need? At what point do we need to replace them and why? So that might be something to talk to him about also, to better understand why we need, continued replacement of trucks for the department in there. So, Ryan, maybe you can communicate that to him too. Just, we're going to probably ask him about that. The rationale behind fire truck replacement and why, when we've gotten a couple new ones in the last few years.
And do we have just one ambulance in town?
We have 2. We have a newer one that was purchased 3 years ago, maybe.
Yeah.
That's our newest one. And then there's an older one, circa 2010, 12, somewhere in 2010, maybe. That's more of a backup role right now.
And this new ambulance on the capital plan would flip flop that. So the new one would become the old one. But they do need 2. What the years are involved with that, and that's a question for the chief. The older one does require significant repairs when it breaks down, so they tend to lean on the newer one, which was what happens when you defer capital. So you get something new and you just beat it up because the old stuff doesn't work.
And obviously that's in the fire department, that's the equipment that gets the most use is that ambulance, not, you know, not necessarily all the trucks and stuff. And they all get hard use, but the ambulance is going to get the biggest use. So yeah, is that another question for Bob too, right? I mean, we put the ambulance in the near future and then the truck wait another 5 years before that gets replaced. So, and as far as building goes, does the select board, Ryan, want us to function as a de facto building committee and decide what gets built, or just how it's going to be funded? Like, what is their charge for us in that case?
So they're looking for a recommendation from this board on how to proceed next. So not necessarily a building committee, but I don't want to sway the conversation because I definitely don't want it to be my plan. It should be your plan, but we want to proceed with this building and this plan for long-term capital using debt, as you said, with, you know, 5 years later, 3 years later, trying to do X, Y, or Z. So they're looking for that type of recommendation based off your deliberations that they can then execute and say, okay, we're going to put together the building committee, or, you know, have you come in and discuss it more. But they're looking for a committee to set the next step, or at least continue the direction. As Dan likes to say, the board doesn't want to put their head in the sand and just to say there's no problem. They want to move forward with something. So.
All right. I mean, we had a good discussion last time, and you know, I think everybody's on the same page and has been for a while that I think well, it'd be nice to get a whole senior center, town hall, and public safety building. I think that's going to be unrealistic to get through the town. I do think there's a lot of support for public safety. I understand what Bill said last time was, you know, costs are up from when we first started this discussion 5 years ago. But I still think you can get a lot of support behind fire and police. Everybody knows that their buildings are in tough shape, and everybody usually supports fire and police, especially in our town. So I would, and I've always said this, I would be gung-ho to support a public safety building, fire and police, and just get it done. You know, I know last time we talked about just doing police and maybe adding a garage for an ambulance or something, but I think if we're going to do it, just sell a public safety building instead of piecemeal, because it's going to end up being more expensive as time goes on anyway. But design it so that you can add on to it over time, and maybe in 10 years or 15 years we're in a better spot, or I don't know, we have some massive grant and we can build a new senior center or town hall, but, you know, design it with that in mind on the layout of the land. So I've been saying that since I was on the select board too, but certainly leave it open to the floor so we can make a recommendation for you.
Michael, I do remember some time ago, I mean, this last meeting, we also did discuss that the highest priority, at least from my understanding, is that the fire department seems to have the biggest need, right? I mean, if we have to make some additional decisions between public safety, between the police and the fire, it is the fire department that appear to have the biggest need right now.
Correct.
Because they're in two locations. One is the logistics, and the second is that the time to response is impacted, and we do have I mean, the Breezy Hill locations is in dire shape, and not that the other one is not, but I mean, for all intents and purposes, both locations are in dire shape, right?
Yep.
Okay, so I think we need to maybe also have a brief discussion with Bill when he's available to understand exactly what are the requirements from a firehouse perspective. This is how I would like to approach it. I'd like to understand what are the minimum requirements, or what are the requirements at this day and age for a firehouse. And then from there, we could potentially add it. I mean, I know these are not Lego blocks, but if we start off with that, then we at least know what minimally is required, and that's certainly the first pitch to do here.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea. You know, Bill did mention that the biggest cost of the public safety building is the bay for the trucks.
Yep.
So, you know, if we're going to do fire, if we're just going to do police, I mean, that's where correct me if I'm wrong, where he was saying if you leave out the bay and leave out fire, you can get it down to a cheaper price. But as soon as you put the bay on, that's where the money comes in.
But we do need a bay.
We do
Because-
need a bay, right? So if you're going to if you're going to put up a bay, I think adding quarters for the police and administrative wing and stuff like that was, not cheap money, but relatively short money compared to the cost of the fire. The fire was the big expense, if I remember him correctly.
Okay, but there is a breaking point, and that's what we need to consider here. And I think that at this point in time, fire being the biggest priority, we need to understand what the absolute cost is there, and understand whether or not that hits already the breaking point, or if we can go further before we hit that breaking point, and therefore add the police department in there. That's what I'm looking at.
Yep, I do. I remember him saying police was about 2 million to do police, and then adding the fire was anywhere between 4 to 6 million more.
All right.
And we did talk about the police, though, moving would then free up space to move people from the library, would then free up money, grant money for for repairs at the library, which we do not have access to, as well as the police needing an area because they can't hold people who are incarcerated. They have no holding area for them.
All right.
Yeah, and then people always ask me, so then what? Right? So part of your recommendation would be to perhaps sell the current land for the fire department if you were to move it. And then I can tell you that the town staff is pretty resilient. So if you gave us the Slade building to ourselves, then short term you could partition off. For those who are familiar with the Slade building, there's a hallway that goes to the police department from the town hall side. You could partition that off and you could give the seniors more space. You could give them office space, another bathroom for relatively cheap money with just partition. And then you could move, there's only 2 offices left in the library basement. You could move the town clerk and the building inspector's office to where the police administration office is now and give another office for relatively cheap money. The only thing you couldn't move is the vault, right? So we could accomplish the vault in the basement of the library can't be moved cheaply. You can't put in a new vault cheaply for the town clerk. So long story short, you could relatively cheaply renovate the Slade building for a short-term solution to solve some of those bigger problems if you were to move the police out of there, which is what Bill Murray was saying. Then, as you saw in my little wish list, you would either talk about adding on to the public safety building at some point or renovating the Slade building at some point, but you got to take that first step. I completely agree with everybody that you got to do the first step for people to see the second step, but I think they want to know what's next, and that's important to mention as well. So that's why I wanted to include some of that commentary. Even if you just move fire, they're going to want to know what's the next puzzle step.
Okay.
I agree with you. I mean, having sort of a story that can be presented beyond just the immediate first step is critical.
And you did, and this is hypothetical, so I don't want anyone to write about this that I'm saying this, but if you are anticipating marijuana money, and as Michael correctly said, you don't know how long you're going to have that money, then dedicating a revenue source like that to solve this problem is a perfect solution. So you could say debt exclude the public safety side of the house, use the operational budget and debt to cover some of the problems with future capital, and then any marijuana monies could be the money that you use to renovate the Slade, so you're not putting all the pressure on the taxpayer. Just one solution. But having kind of a story, as Francois just said really well, might be helpful. And I think that's what the selectmen are looking to see if you can help them do.
Ryan, do we have an estimate over the next year or two when these things are all built, what the approximate income is going to be?
It's, I hate to throw numbers out, but several $100,000.
Okay.
If everything goes well, they actually get in, they get the permits, and sales are robust, then for 5 years, we will get 3 to 6% of that, and it'll be a significant amount of money based off of current market.
Okay.
But after 5 years, I think the state changes the formula for that. And although we'll still get revenue from it, it won't be anywhere near that level. So that's why identifying a good one-time source for this money is what a smart town would do, as opposed to trying using it year over year and having it disappear in 5 years.
I mean, so that certainly is enough money to start us, you know, even if we put it in a bank and we say that that money is going to be for, you know, capital improvements of any kind. I mean, you could use that money to buy the fire truck. You can use that money to renovate the Slade building, you know, because like you said, if we get $300,000, I bet you with between 300,000 and 500,000, you can do all the renovations in the Slade building you need, temporary renovations at least. So, all right, well, it's good to know. That helps out a little bit in the thinking. So why don't we, I'm going to just make a suggestion, because I don't think we can move forward much more tonight with anything, but we're close. Why don't we plan for next meeting then to talk to the department heads, Travis and Bob, take a final vote on the capital plan for the next 5 years. Hopefully Bill will be able to come next meeting. We can talk a little bit more about the building. I think we're all in agreement. Some form of public safety is going to be what our recommendation is. That's what it sounds like.
Yep.
And then kind of what we want to do with marijuana money, at least a framework for marijuana money, fire truck in the future, ambulance in the future, some Slade building renovations and that. So I think we should be able to wrap that up next meeting and have some recommendations out to the board. Sound reasonable?
I agree.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. Anything else tonight, Ryan?
Nope, we solved all the world's problems. So
All right.
easy work.
Do we want to meet next? Is Tuesday good for people? You want to meet the 8th or the 15th?
Let me double check here.
Tuesdays are good for me.
Tuesday,
either
the
day.
8th. Well,
I'm free both. I mean, do you want to meet basically you want to meet in a week or do you want to meet in 2 weeks?
Do a week.
Okay, I'm okay with that. You all right with that, Ryan?
That's better for me. So the 8th.
The 8th. Same time, 8 o'clock, or you want to guys do earlier?
I can do earlier that night unless this is a beneficial.
my preference is earlier if we can. But
I can't do any earlier than 7. I have another meeting.
I know that feeling.
Yeah. All right, how about we do 7:30 next week?
better than 8.
Sounds good.
All right, 7:30, December 8th.